I'll just wait for Jonathan to hand presenter rights over to me, and then I can work my way through these slides.
Okay, just pass them over to you now.
Okay, great, thank you. So if anybody can't hear me, maybe just send a message. Otherwise, I'll assume that you can all hear me okay. So I'm from an organisation called Global Action Plan. We're an environmental charity, UK-based. We've also got global affiliates around the world. And I'll just tell you a little bit about Global Action Plan. So we're the UK's leading environmental behaviour change charity, and the only UK provider of UN accredited behaviour change programmes. So all of our behaviour change programmes are endorsed by UNEP and United Nations Environment Programme. And we are a behaviour change organisation. So this is primarily what we'll be talking about in this session, is how can we influence other people's behaviour around the environment. So just the small things, the simple things that we do every day at home and at work that collectively can have a really big influence on the environment. And that's very much what we focus on as an organisation. We're not an environmental charity in the sense of Friends of the Earth or Greenpeace, those kind of organisations who do fantastic work, but it's perhaps more about trying to influence what others do, so what business are doing or what government are doing, and lobbying those organisations. We're very much about, well, what can individuals do? What can we all do in our everyday lives to reduce our impact on the environment? Excuse me. So we've got close to 20 years experience now working with over 200 large organisations, public and private. We've trained well over 2,500 people during that time in face-to-face training sessions. Current clients that we're working with include Unilever, Sainsbury's, Open University, Bloomsbury Colleges, Skanska, NHS, and that's just a small selection, that lots more as well, that we're currently working with on essentially employee engagement and behaviour change projects around sustainability and the environment. And then just thought it was worth mentioning that last week, I'm sure many of you were aware, it was Go Green Week, and we worked with 7 universities using our interactive displays, which are, we've got an energy bike, which is like an exercise bike, but powers various different appliances, and people can feel, tangibly understand with their legs how much energy various appliances such as light bulbs and iPods and TV screens, how much energy they require to actually power them. And we've also got a driving simulator, which rather than being a racing game, it's about how efficiently you can drive. That's a really good way of engaging people on those eco-driving messages and fuel efficiency messages. So we used some of those interactive displays at universities last week as part of Go Green Week. There are a few core principles that underlie all of our work, and we work with, as well as large organisations, we work with SMEs, we work with community groups, we work with youth audiences, we work with primary and secondary schools as well. But whatever audience we're working with, there are some key principles that run throughout. The first is to try and work with people to understand the motivators and the barriers to change. So understanding why it is that people are behaving in a certain way, and then you're in a much better place to try and tackle that. That's something that I'll go on to talk a little bit more about in a second. Collaborating, so trying to get people to work together at all levels, and that we feel that's a much more effective way of bringing about change. People trying to do things in isolation tends to, they tend to come up against barriers, and it's very easy to become disillusioned and give up, essentially. Whereas if you can bring people together in groups, it tends to be much more effective in our experience. Measuring, so any of our programs, we always try and build in measurements so that you can track progress and reward success, which is a really crucial part of it, and an often forgotten part of the process is actually thanking people and rewarding people for successes and changes that they've brought about. Avoiding jargon, so hopefully wherever possible we avoid jargon. we try to use simple, easy language, easy to understand language, and dispel some of the common myths that exist around environmental issues. And I think this is something that perhaps the environmental movement has been very guilty of in the past, is using too much jargon and scientific language, and people don't really respond to that. So trying to make it more relevant to people's everyday lives is, we feel, crucial. And then finally, innovating. So working with groups of champions within any organisation, whether that's a school or a large business, to try and find the interesting, fun ways in which you can get people's attention and get people involved, and keeping it positive, essentially, and not sort of relying on those doom and gloom environmental messages, which we don't feel particularly resonate with most people. So moving on, so the objectives of this session, we're going to look at exploring the barriers and motivations to change, a little bit about the importance of understanding your audience and who you're actually talking to, and then tailoring your message accordingly. And then we'll have a look at some examples of what other organisations have done, which might just give you a bit of inspiration for what you need to do at your organisation. So looking at behaviour change then, and this photograph here just demonstrates that common sense is not always common practice, and people don't always do the logical thing. So we've got people there taking the escalator up to the gym, and this is something that happens, not necessarily the escalator to the gym, but illogical behaviour is something that we see day in, day out, and it's important to understand why these things are happening, and then you're in a much better place to change them. So what we've got here is I suppose, what's traditionally the traditional model of trying to change people's behaviour, and it's a little bit outdated, to be honest. So the assumption there was that you provide people with the information, they therefore have the knowledge and will shift their values and change their behaviour accordingly. Something like smoking might be a good example of this, where initially some of the early anti-smoking campaigns just gave people the information about the damage it can cause to your health, and assumed that would stop people from smoking, and in fact, it stopped some people from smoking, but for the majority it didn't. Because actually what you need to do is understand all of the different reasons why people smoke and overcome those barriers. And you can apply that just as easily to environmental issues. So behaviour is complex. There are all sorts of different motivators. And this just lists some of them. There are many more besides, in terms of why people might be doing certain things. Now that might be not switching off lights. It might be not using the correct facilities, recycling facilities that are provided. So context is an important one. The context around you, the workplace around you, and how other people act. External factors, so actually recycling is a good example there. So if the bins are not adequate, if the recycling bins are not up to scratch, and say there are no facilities to recycle glass, for example, then obviously people won't recycle glass because the facilities just aren't there. And if you identify that is the issue, then obviously that's the one you need to tackle first before you look at any of the others. Self-efficacy, just working around clockwise around this list, is quite an interesting one. It's essentially people's confidence in their own ability to do something. A good example here might be something like a video conference or a webinar, in fact, where people might feel that they're not comfortable having a video conference, and they prefer to travel in person, because they're perhaps a little bit sort of technophobic and worried about getting it wrong, and perhaps in front of an important client or an important contact. Therefore, they prefer to just travel, because there's that self-efficacy issue of not being confident that you'll be able to do it. Knowledge is an important one, which is, sometimes knowledge is not sufficient on its own, but if people aren't provided with the correct knowledge of what they should or shouldn't be doing, then they're unlikely to do the correct thing. So actually, good signage around recycling bins is a good example there of providing people with the correct knowledge. Emotions, so that could be stress, and I would use an example there of driving habits, and people, when they're stressed or angry, then more likely to drive erratically and harsh acceleration, harsh braking, which would use more fuel. So that has an impact. Social in and out groups, important. In any kind of community or workplace, there are certain groups, and people either do or don't want to be part of those groups. And some people will want to be part of the group that are seen to be green, and some people probably actively don't want to be in that group, and will want to distance themselves from that. There are lots of still lots of preconceptions about people, about environmentalists, and perhaps lots of outdated and old-fashioned preconceptions about them, but they do exist, and I see them week in, week out. Some people don't want to be seen as that person. Conversely, some people do want to be seen as that person. Symbolic consumption. So the big 4x4 gas guzzler could be an example of that. And people seeing that as a status symbol, and that's using more fuel, bigger impacts on the environment. Social norms, really important one, and it's really just what everybody else is doing around you, and this is really a really strong motivator within any workplace. If other people switch everything off at the end of the day, then you're much more likely to follow suit. Most people don't want to be in the minority, and will just naturally follow the herd. Some people will want to be in the minority and will actively do that, but most people don't, and most people will just follow what everybody else is doing. And it's actually quite useful to use social norms to your advantage if you can identify that lots of people are doing what you want them to be doing. So say switching off computers at the end of the day, and you actually identify that, say, 70% of the workplace are doing that, then it's really useful to promote that, promote the positive rather than pointing the finger at the 30% who aren't, because actually once people see that the majority are, more people are likely to follow suit. Social identity, that's who you see yourself as, and how you want to be viewed by others. And again, sort of links with the social in and out groups. And do you want to be that person who wastes energy unnecessarily or wastes fuel unnecessarily? And then, really crucially, habits and routines. And we are creatures of habit, and most of what we do day in, day out, we don't actively think about. We're doing it out of habit. So it's about how you can break those habits and get people into new routines. So moving on, once you've tried to identify what the motivators are and why people are behaving in a certain way, well, then you can tailor your campaign accordingly. So at the top left there, if you identify that actually it's a lack of knowledge, then that's a fairly simple one. You make the information accessible, you make it very easy and attention-grabbing. If it's a social norm issue, as I mentioned, you just try to show how much of the positive behaviour is already going on. Play on the positives rather than the negatives. And if it's an external barrier, then it could be a lack of facilities. I gave the example of recycling facilities. Then clearly that barrier needs to be removed before anything else. One example I've given there is around reusable coffee and tea cups. So if people don't have any other option within a workplace but to use disposable ones, then clearly that's what they'll do. But if you provide them with an alternative, then it stands to reason they're much more likely to do it. So really, behaviour change is about three key things: ability, motivation, and trigger. So ability being what would help you feel more able to do it, motivation, what would make you want to do it, and trigger, what would prompt you to try it. So if we look at those in a bit more detail, ability, well, that could be about the knowledge that you can do it, or that you should even be doing it in the first place. Self-efficacy, as I mentioned, that confidence in your own ability to do something. I gave the example of video conferencing, and one way of getting around that could be by providing training or workshops for people to try video conferencing. It could be setting up informal situations where they can give it a go, and there's no pressure. You can get used to the software, so that when you actually need to do it properly, you're much more comfortable with it. And then, obviously, external factors such as lack of facilities can prevent people from doing something. So that all falls under the ability bracket. Then the motivation, and this is essentially what's in it for me. So trying to explain to people why it will benefit them to be doing this. And actually, very few people, or the minority of people, will be motivated by it being good for the environment. But that's fine, because actually for most of what we're talking about, whether it's saving energy or waste issues, there are so many other reasons for people to get involved, whether it's saving money, saving time, meeting person's image of themselves, making them feel good about themselves. There are lots of reasons for any given action or behaviour that you can find for people to get involved, and often it's not because it's not about the environment, and that won't necessarily work for getting everybody on board. And then finding the trigger. So breaking habits is difficult. There's a piece of research from UCL from 2009 that said it takes 66 days to form a new habit. So it's not easy, but it is possible. So finding prompts, to snap people out of those daily habits and routines. At the bottom there, the environment rarely works as a trigger. So as I mentioned, don't rely on those green, do it because it's the right thing to do sort of messages, because they rarely work. You need to understand your audience and identify what is their particular trigger. And I'll just give you a couple of. Actually, I'll just talk you through this first. This is some research that DEFRA, Department for the Environment, did a few years ago, and they segmented the UK population into these 7 groups according to their ability to act and their willingness to act on environmental issues. And what they found was that in the top right-hand corner were the positive greens, very able and very willing to act on environmental issues, but only about 18% of the UK population fall into that bracket. If you go to the far left, honestly disengaged, the same amount of people, 18%, so it's just short of a fifth of the population that are honestly disengaged on environmental issues. And what that means is that they really won't get involved until absolutely everybody else is doing it, and they're the last one standing, if you like. So the reason for showing you this is a common trap is to aim to start with the people on the left-hand side, the honestly disengaged, and think, well, if I can really get the tough nuts cracked, then the rest will fall into place. And actually, it works the other way around. The way to do it is to start with your positive greens and grow your group from there. So then get your concerned consumers on board, and the people who are perhaps willing to do something, but you'd have to make it just very easy and put it on a plate for them, and then they'll get involved and grow that group. And then you start to get that social norm that I mentioned in the workplace, and you finally you achieve a tipping point where the majority will come on board, but really don't start with the people most resistant, because they tend to be resistant and quite vocal. So they can drain a lot of energy and a lot of time. I'm just going to show you some examples of where organisations have very successfully targeted specific audiences and understood what those audience triggers are, and then tailored messages appropriately. This is an example from the United States. I think it's pronounced Chesapeake Bay on the eastern coast, and they were having problems with people watering putting fertilizer on their lawns in the spring, and it was all, the rainwater was washing all of this fertilizer into the bay. It was killing the crabs. And they started off with messaging around sort of biodiversity and don't kill the crabs. We need to look after our local environment. It didn't work. It didn't do anything. And they did a bit of research with the local population. They found that actually why people were concerned about crabs because they wanted to eat them. So that's what their message became: save the crabs, then eat them. So initially they essentially went for the environment message, and it didn't work. And then they researched their audience, they understood their audience, and discovered that actually it was about eating the crabs. Now, whether you agree with that or not, it was effective, and people stopped fertilizing their lawns in the spring, and the crab population started increasing. Another example from the United States. This is from Texas. Is a campaign in the late 80s, I think. Really successful campaign to stop people littering on highways in Texas. And they found that the main demographic responsible for that was young males. On what did young males really care about? Well, they really cared about being Texan. They were very patriotic, very proud of being Texan. So that became the focus of the campaign. Don't mess with Texas. Real Texans don't litter. And it became a real successful campaign. There were T-shirts and billboards and such like, and was credited with reducing litter on Texan highways by about 73% over a 4-year period. They understood their audience, and they targeted their message appropriately. It wasn't really about littering; it was about pride in your state. So just on that same note of not relying on environmental issues, I'd like to show this cartoon, which is just lists all of the other benefits. What if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? And then on the bullet point list there: sustainability, green jobs, renewables, clean water, clean air, healthy children. All of the things that are byproducts essentially of what we're talking about with sustainability. And it's fairly difficult to argue with most of those things. So in terms of creating that business case, if that's what you need to do internally, there are lots of really strong reasons for doing this, other than the environmental sort of imperative. Well, there's the direct impacts of climate change. So almost a third of UK businesses were significantly affected by extreme weather between 2007 and 2010. And globally, that figure's close to 9 out of 10 businesses affected by extreme weather. Increased efficiency, obviously it's about the bottom line, and it leads to increased profit or better margins. So it is essentially about saving money and reducing waste. Increasingly, it's about retaining, motivating, and attracting employees and good employees. Risk management, keeping up with competition, market demand, government regulation. You could add funding requirements to that list as well. So lots of really compelling reasons for getting on board with sustainability and environment. So just quickly, our recommended approach to behaviour change. Create and follow a really clear and simple process with really clear roles and responsibilities. Provide very practical, jargon-free information to people. Not weighing people down with too many statistics and such like, which they're not necessarily going to respond to. Find those social norms within your workplace or within your local, within your organisation, and really play to them. Set up peer-to-peer groups. So if you have a group of champions, a green network of some kind, then really tap into that. If you don't, then I really recommend you set one up. Measurement and feedback, and really don't forget the feedback. It's really important to tell people, or to thank people for their contributions and for what they've done, and tell them what difference they've made. And finally, just keep it positive and have some fun with it, because it can be doom and gloom, some of the stuff we're talking about, but it really doesn't have to be. I'll show you some examples very quickly if I've got time. And Jonathan, just send me a quick message if I do need to wrap up. But I'll just show you some examples of what other organisations that we've worked with have done and how they've got their colleagues on board, and might just give you a bit of inspiration. This was a group of champions who, I think they worked for a bank in the City of London and wanted to reduce paper use. And they estimated, or they worked out that the paper they used in 1 week, it's quite a big office, in 1 week would actually stack up to the height of their atrium. So they had this central atrium where people would have teas and coffees and lunch and such like in meetings. So the group of Green Champions worked with the facilities team to actually construct this paper tower out of the empty paper boxes they used in just 1 week. It appeared one morning. They didn't actually explain it at first, and this was a really crucial part of it, that they kept it quite cryptic and got people talking, really grabbed people's attentions, got people asking, well, what on earth is this construction in the atrium? And there was a real sort of, viral sort of buzz about it around the office that morning. And then in the afternoon, they sent an email saying, this is what that represents. It's 1 week's paper. Really shocked people into, well, that's a lot of paper for just one office. And then crucially, they gave them lots of really practical information about what they could do to reduce it. So, double siding and think before you print and printing two up and such like. So grabbed people's attention, got people talking, and then gave them really practical information about what they could do about the problem. Make it visual. So this is an example of people tying balloons to computers that either have or haven't been switched off, or monitors that have or haven't been switched off. And again, this is where social norming can be really powerful. If you find out, if you can ascertain that the majority of people in your workplace are switching off, then actually tying balloons to those who've switched off, rather than sort of pointing the finger at those who haven't, can be a really powerful way of getting people to change. People coming in one morning and seeing that everybody's got a balloon but they don't, actually is quite a powerful motivator. This is another example of social norming. You can't read that very well, but it's an example from the London Underground, and it says 99% of young Londoners do not commit serious youth violence. So the message being, do you really want to be part of that 1% who does commit serious youth violence? As I said earlier, there'll always be one or two people who say, well, yes, I do. I want to be that 1%. Most people don't, though. Most people want to be in that 99%. So actually, rather than pointing the finger at the 1%, you almost celebrate the 99%. Some of you may have seen these before. You see them in hotel bathrooms. And they tried a few different approaches. The first one was just saying that reusing your towels will help the environment. And then they tried this approach, which was join your fellow guests in helping to save the environment by reusing your towels. And what they found was that 26% more people recycled their towels if the message informed them that others were doing it as well. So really crucial that people don't feel like they're doing it on their own. They don't feel isolated. They understand that actually this is part of a much bigger thing that other people are involved in as well. So the more you can share those stories, share best practice of what's happening, and keep it positive, the better. Competition is a really powerful tool, and the more you can use it, the better. Whether it's departments competing against each other, or different floors, different buildings competing against each other, a really good way of getting people involved who might not otherwise be that interested, but the moment you tap into their competitive spirit, they are interested. Be creative. This was a really nice example from Channel 4. They obviously have a really good in-house creative team, but they wanted to get people to, initially they wanted people to not use disposable water cups at all, but for one reason or another they weren't able to do that. So they thought the next best thing is to try and get people to at least use the same one each day. So not just throwing it away after every drink, but keep the same disposable cup throughout the day. So they came up with this really nice campaign. Are you a paper cup polygamist? Do you use over one paper cup a day? Really successful campaign, light-hearted, bit of fun, and obviously a nice bit of design from the creative team there as well. But again, if you may well know somebody who can help with design and making it look a bit snappy. Really does help. Incentivise and reward. So using the carrot as well as the stick, I suppose, is what I'm getting at here, and incentivize people to do it, and then can't reiterate it strong enough. It's reward them and celebrate the achievements once they've happened, and those positive feedback loops. And then this is a nice example of using a bit of humour in a campaign. And this was a group of champions who wanted to try and stop people from contaminating the recycling bins, so putting the wrong thing in the wrong bin. And they had a discussion about, well, what else in our daily lives do we do that involves separating things? And they said, well, your whitewash and then your coloured wash, you wouldn't put something red in with your whitewash. So that became the focus of their recycling campaign, and it resonated with people. Everybody could relate to that, and it wasn't pointing the finger. It was light-hearted and very successful as a result. So that's all from me. Hopefully that's a very quick snapshot, and I realise I covered a lot in a short amount of time there. We can share these slides with you afterwards. I can PDF them and send them to Jonathan to circulate. But if you do have any questions, then just type it in on the chat box there on the right hand side, and I'll be happy to answer them. So there's a question there from Caroline Wilson. Have you got a fuller reference to Drummond et al.? I'm fairly sure we can find that. So I will dig that out and include that with the slides.
Hi, Gavin. I think there's also a question from a Mohammed when we talk about behaviour change.
Okay.
I think it should be in the chat box.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that one. No, I don't seem to have that.
Oh, no, I think he sent to me privately. But here we go. I think it's been sent to everybody now.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so when we talk about behaviour change, everyone seems to talk more about bottom level, staff and students in university context. How can you change the behaviour of top senior management so the environment element is integrated into the whole business and strategic decision-making process to bring the whole organisation change and wider influence? So I think I probably, let me go back to the slide. I think it's about talking in the language that senior management understand and are comfortable with. So this business case slide, I think, goes some way to explain that. Some of the types of motivations that we found senior management, senior executives will respond to. The other thing is there's a good example of an organisation we worked with last year who they wanted to get senior management buy-in for a travel initiative they were running. They were really struggling to get any senior management buy-in for it. But they put their heads together and thought, what do the senior management here like? What are they into? And what they decided was that they all like their cars. They've all got big, gas guzzling cars. Their BMWs, their Mercedes. So they actually had arranged a test drive of a hybrid Lexus, a really nice top-range hybrid Lexus car. One of the senior executives took up the offer, test drove it, absolutely loved it, and became a real advocate of electric vehicles and, as a result, of their travel initiative. and then became their real champion and supporter at the top level of the organisation. So it's just an example to show that it's about understanding again I talked about the triggers. It is it's about finding the triggers that the senior management have and playing to them. Hopefully that answers your question, Mohammed. There's one from Tim as well.
Yep, it says you got this one.
Can you point us in the direction of evidence examples for how behaviour change will retain, motivate, and attract employees as a benefit? Yes, I actually think I've got some on the notes of that slide. So just bear with me a second. I'll just go to the other one. Steve Marsden says that isn't a business case, no return on investment figures. Yeah, that's a very good point. Return on investment is clearly a very strong business case as well. I guess that's what I was getting at with the increased efficiency, increased profit. But no, you're quite right, Steve. Return on investment as well. So just bear with me a second. I'm just going to see if I can dig out this statistic, if I've got time, Jonathan.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
I might just copy this into the chat actually, and then you can all read it. Oh, and sorry, I've shared that privately. 1 second. To everyone.
Okay, just a final reminder, does anybody have any final questions? No? Okay, well, I'd like to say again a big thank you to Gavin for presenting. It was a really insightful look at behaviour change. As I mentioned in the original host notes, all of the information will be available on the Sustainability Exchange after the webinar is finished, and we hope to see you again. Thank you very much for attending.
Thanks, everyone.